You didn't wake up. You were already late, and you knew it before you opened your eyes. The house was awake, moving quietly without you, as if the morning didn't need your permission. A radio murmured somewhere out of sight. The kettle clicked off before you were ready. The floor was cold under your feet, sharp enough to focus your thoughts. Your uniform was still damp from yesterday. Not wet enough to change, just uncomfortable enough to notice. There wasn't time. There was a rule nobody ever explained. No sign, no warning. You felt it long before you could put it into words. Missed this morning, and the day didn't shout at you or punish you. It simply turned against you, quietly and patiently, in small ways that followed you. Everyone knew the rule. Nobody ever said it out loud. And here's the question. What was that rule? And why did it matter so much? The kitchen was already in use when you got there. Mugs on the counter, a chair pulled back, then pushed in again. Everything suggested you were late without saying it. Someone stood there, busy with small, necessary things. They didn't look at the clock. They didn't need to. They looked at you. Not with anger, not even disappointment. Just a glance that carried a question you weren't meant to answer. You ate quickly, even if you weren't hungry. Toast, tea, whatever was there. Breakfast wasn't meant to linger. It was about not slowing the morning down. Nobody told you to hurry. Nobody had to. And here's the next question. If no one said a word, why did you still feel the pressure? Outside, the street felt different, colder and quieter, as if everyone was holding the same breath without realizing it. By the time you reached the bus stop, it was already full. Children stood close together with their bags at their feet, shoulders pulled in against the cold, all facing the same direction. Nobody talked, but nobody felt alone either. You knew where to stand without thinking about it. Not at the front where you might be noticed, and not at the back where you might be left behind. Somewhere in the middle felt right, safe. Faces looked familiar in a way you couldn't explain, tired but alert, already prepared for what was coming next. No one checked the time, yet everyone seemed to know exactly how much was left. When the bus finally appeared, there was no rush, just a quiet step forward, perfectly timed. And here's the question. If nobody gave instructions, how did everyone know what to do? Being late didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, through small signs you learned to read without being taught. A look held a second longer than usual, a name called without warmth, a pause where there shouldn't have been one. No one raised their voice, and no rule was read out loud, yet you understood that something had shifted. Time felt heavier, as if it belonged to someone else now, and you were already behind it. You tried to move faster without drawing attention, hoping the moment would pass, but it never quite did. Once the morning slipped, it stayed slipped, following you through the day in ways that were hard to explain. Nothing dramatic happened, yet everything felt slightly wrong, as though you had missed a step and couldn't go back to find it. And here's the question. If nobody punished you, why did the mistake feel permanent? The strange part was how calm the adults were, as if the morning had happened 1,000 times and would happen 1,000 more, regardless of how you felt inside. They moved through routines with quiet certainty, making tea, finding socks, checking nothing, saying very little, yet somehow controlling everything. If you tried to explain yourself, you didn't get an argument, and you didn't get comfort either, because explanations weren't the currency of the house. What mattered was that you learned, quickly and without drama, how to fit into the rhythm. You watched their faces for clues, the smallest changes in tone, the way a question was asked, or not asked. And you realized the lesson was never spoken. It was demonstrated. You weren't being trained to be perfect. You were being trained to be ready. And here's the question. If they never explained the rules, how did you still learn them so fast? What stayed with you most was how similar everyone seemed once the day was moving. Different houses, different streets, yet the same posture, the same pace, the same careful way of not standing out. Nobody told you to copy anyone, but copying felt safer than choosing. You adjusted your steps, your voice, even your face, until you matched the shape of the group without thinking about it. Standing apart never felt like freedom. It felt like risk. So you learned to blend in quietly, to wait your turn, to move when others moved, because that was how the day went more smoothly. It wasn't fear that guided you, and it wasn't obedience either. It was something quieter, a shared understanding that being unnoticed was a kind of success. And here's the question. If no one forced you to conform, why did it feel so natural to do it anyway? What surprised you later was how your body learned before your mind did. You stood straighter without being told, moved faster when the space tightened, lowered your voice as soon as a room changed. No one gave instructions, yet your shoulders adjusted, your hands stayed busy, your feet found their place without asking. You reacted before thinking, as if the rules lived somewhere deeper than words. It felt automatic, almost calm, the way you learned when to hurry and when to wait, when to speak and when to stay quiet, guided by signals too small to notice at the time. You didn't decide to behave this way. Your body decided first, because that was quicker, and quicker felt safer. And here's the question. If no one trained you, why did your body know exactly what to do? It was only much later that you began to recognize what those mornings were really doing. They weren't preparing you for lessons or routines, and they certainly weren't about obedience in the simple sense. What you were learning was how to exist inside expectations that were never written down. How to read a room, how to adjust without protest, how to carry on even when something felt slightly wrong. You learned that time didn't belong to you, at least not yet, and that being ready mattered more than being comfortable. None of this was explained, because explanation would have slowed the process. It all felt ordinary then, almost invisible, which is why it worked so well and stayed with you long after the mornings themselves were gone. And here's the question. If it felt so normal at the time, why does it stand out so clearly now? By the end, the rule finally becomes clear, even though it was never spoken and never written down. Those mornings weren't about discipline, and they weren't about control in the way we usually imagine it. They were teaching you how to carry responsibility before you had a word for it. How to notice expectations, how to meet them quietly, how to keep moving even when nothing was explained. You learned that being ready mattered more than being comfortable, and that time for a while belonged to someone else. Not because it was taken from you, but because you were being prepared to hold it yourself one day. That was the rule. Not hurry, not fear, but learning how to step into the day without being told how. And once you see it, you realize you've been using that lesson ever since.